by several serial killers, including Ed Gein. So basically, you know, some of the Hollywood serial killers, they just take like the weirdest or grossest things from particular of the killers, and they sort of weave them together.
It's like a pretty boy. They made him pretty boy instead of ugly. You know, influence and stuff.
I do find it really just, you know, absolutely fascinating, though, that Dahmer's become such a big pop culture staple, like in the last year or so. I mean, you didn't really hear a lot about Dahmer, and then suddenly he's got like not one, but I think two separate Netflix series coming out. Or I think they're both out now. Like,
I want to see that, but I've just been, I don't know if I need to. Kind of, I like Evan Peters, the guy from American Horror Story, but you know, American Horror Story is a little too much sometimes too. But I don't know. I may watch it one year, but maybe not. You know?
Well, as Jeffrey knows, what you may not know is that I knew a serial killer who, except for the cannibalism, pretty much did a lot of the same kinds of things that Dahmer did.
Oh, really?
And he's not as well known because he didn't have as many, at least recorded or confessed victims. And this was Bob Berdella in Kansas City, Missouri in the late 1980s.
Okay, I think I know.
And you know, he kept souvenirs, and he what he did was he held people for longer periods of time, you know, whereas Dahmer, he pretty much had disposed or killed his victims, you know, by the next day. You know, Berdella held on to his victims for weeks, torturing them.
Wasn't there something about super glue? Why do I always remember super glue? Is there something?
I have no idea what you're talking about there, but he might have used super glue. I don't know, but you know, there's only ever been one true crime book that's ever been written about Berdella. Only one really poorly done, overly sensationalistic and very stereotypical about gay men movie documentary that's ever been done about him. And there are a lot of interesting issues surrounding why that is the case. You know, I did a couple of interviews with the guys at Conspiranormal about it, and talked about, you know, some of my suspicions about some of his possible connections or kind of tangential connections to the Franklin scandal, or elements of the Franklin scandal. After I did the first of those interviews, I was contacted by the niece of one of the victims, and she had done quite a bit of research on her own. And she interestingly had come to a lot of the same conclusions I had independently, based on, you know, her research, because she's been able to have more constant research. But it's an interesting question, you know. The question as to how and if certain serial killers are connected to larger groups. You know, I don't think that that Franklin scandal was not a cult per se. It was a syndicate, essentially, and drug trafficking syndicate. But certainly, what ended up being exposed, which when I did the first interview, I didn't know about until after I had spoken to the niece and was presented with additional information that has never been made public, was that Berdella was into some weird spiritual stuff that he sort of backed into, which I did not know about. And how if he was connected in some way to any other cult, that I'm not aware of that so much, but I do think that there's sufficient evidence to suggest that he was connected to a sadomasochistic group.
Yeah, we'll
that
see.
In some of this stuff.
Well, see, and that's like what I have been, trying to like look at myself. I mean, specifically in relation to Wisconsin, because what really had got my interest with Wisconsin was its links to the purported smiley face killers.
Yeah.
And specifically, I'm just going with like the research on this that's been done by I think it's Kevin Gannon and like a few of the other ex-cops. I've tried to just stick with that and not like the more sensational accounts, because you get into some of this, I mean, it's like, thousands of deaths are being attributed to it. I don't think it's anywhere near on that like scope or realm, but in terms of the work that Gannon and like the people working with him done, I think and there's a very compelling argument to be made for a few of the regions specifically. But one of the ones that they zeroed in on in both the book and then the subsequent docuseries that they did on Oxygen Network was La Crosse, Wisconsin. And La Crosse is like right there at kind of the border between Wisconsin and Minnesota. And that whole, kind of area around Minneapolis is like also a really big region for a lot of smiley victims. But on the whole, just Wisconsin, there are victims that have hailed from all over the state that have been pretty compellingly linked to the smiley face killers by Gannon and company. So that was something that I was really struck by, especially because of the I think really like the kind of ritualistic aspect of the smiley face killings in terms of the use of water repeatedly. Because like I said before, water seems to be a recurring theme in some of these instances of human sacrifice reported throughout history. And certainly there is sort of this like eerie connection in terms of some of the more recent things that have gone on with, in pop culture, some of these other things like that. And then also the use of the smiley face as well, which is really interesting. I mean, I think that was probably a reference in some way to like the Glasgow smile. And a lot of this sort of